All right, so enough of our painfully awkward small talk, and let's jump into the presentation. So, welcome on in, everyone, to our presentation on the roadmap to college. For those of you who don't know us here at Ivy Experience, we are a comprehensive college prep company. We offer services in test prep, academic subject tutoring, essay and application coaching, and college counseling. We started as a small company in the Philadelphia area, hence the references at the beginning here. But we've grown to serve students in over 40 states and over 20 countries, and we've gotten students or helped students be admitted to over 500 colleges and universities over the years. So we're really excited to be here. For our YouTube audience, please like this video and share it with anyone that you think might find it helpful. We love doing these kinds of educational webinars to spread knowledge and information to empower students and families in this process. To introduce myself, my name is Jim Wismer. I'm the director here at Ivy Experience, and I oversee all of our standardized test preparation and subject tutoring for schools. So essentially, I manage and train a team of tutors, and I also work with our families on figuring out plans for standardized testing, when to take the test, SAT versus ACT, and I'll be talking about those elements tonight. We'll have our other hosts introduce themselves one by one. Jordan, why don't we start with you?
Thanks, Jim. Hey, everyone. My name is Jordan Holmes. I am the Assistant Director of College Admissions here at Experience, which means that I'm an essay coach working with students and families on the essays and application portions of this work. Typically, we start that in November of their junior year. But prior to that, we have college counseling meetings, talking with students all about the college process, maximizing high school, things like that. So I do all of those things as well.
And Alyssa?
Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Coltrain. I am the director of college admissions for Ivy Experience. So I, you know, train, hire, and coach all of our essay coaches and advisors on this side of the company, as well as working with students at every stage of the college process, starting with college advising and career and major counseling as early as eighth grade, all the way through the essay and application coaching that we provide for students in junior and senior year.
Awesome, thanks. And Kevin?
Hello, my name is Kevin Trudel. I'm a senior college admissions specialist here at Ivy Experience, meaning that I work with students in much the same way as Jordan and Alyssa, sort of working with them through their juniors and senior years and developing their profiles and applications and engaging in college counseling work with our underclassmen. My background is as a former admissions officer, and I truly enjoy supporting our students here at Ivy Experience.
Awesome. So with that, we're going to jump into it for tonight. Now, most of this presentation is going to be chronological, as in we're going to kind of go from ninth grade all the way through to the time that you put your deposit down at a college. But we wanted to start with the sort of hamster wheel element of this, the cycle that keeps going and going. The academic calendar, which is going to be pretty similar all 4 years of high school for you. We'll touch on some of the elements that do change. But essentially, these factors in the academic calendar, it is going to vary from one school to the next, but there are going to be common themes. So what you need to know for every year, you want to know when your marking periods end, when grades will be finalized in a form that shows up on your transcript. So that might be semesters or trimesters or grading periods, and terminology is going to differ from one school to the next. But just make sure you know like kind of what the unit is that shows up on the transcript, when those grades will be fossilized and captured, and then make sure essentially that you're planning ahead to put great grades down on your transcript. Um, October is the time of year we typically see the first big exams of any school year come. And I see this mostly in the form of panicked requests for subject tutoring in mostly math and science. And what we'll see is, parents calling in, oh my gosh, my student got a D, a C on their first math test, and we need a tutor. And they didn't come to our back to school webinar where we said, please reach out to us early if you're struggling because you don't want to have that bad grade before you get your tutor. You want your tutor to help you make sure that you get a good grade. And whether you're working with a tutor or not, the point is any kind of evaluation of extra support you might need in your courses, whether that's working with an outside tutor, forming a study group with your friends, going to your teacher for extra help. You just want to make sure you calibrate for that so that the first exams that come back in October aren't a rude awakening. January and February are typically an important time of the year too. This is often the time where you might have midterms or finals, depending on what kind of system your school is on. And importantly, course selection for the following school year. And often your options for course selection will be dictated by what your performance has been in that course to that point in the school year. So that's a big watershed moment to understand, what courses you can take in the following year, making sure you're setting yourself up for a rigorous high school experience because the rigor of your high school courses is going to be considered in tandem with your grades in those courses. In May, you may take AP or IB exams. AP exams are a little more common nationwide. They're put on by the College Board, which is the same company that runs the SAT. And they are cumulative exams only taken typically at the culmination of an AP course. So if your school doesn't do AP or IB courses, you're not going to be taking these exams, and that's okay. They're not a requirement. But they are something that can help you in the admissions process and they can get you potential college credit down the line too. So important for families to know that and plan ahead. AP exams can be especially important for students who are applying without an SAT or ACT score. If you think you might be going test optional to college, it's important to remember that you don't have to choose all tests or no tests. You can choose, do I want to submit my SAT? Do I want to submit each of my AP scores individually? So this is the kind of thing where you might be able to help yourself in a subject that's a real strength of yours, even if you're someone who, the SAT or ACT didn't go quite well for. And then in May and sometimes June, if you're in the northern half of the country, I should say, that's when you'll start to see final exams, final papers, and final projects at the very end of the year. So this cycle, again, it's going to be a little bit different year to year based on, students typically taking more APs later on in high school. And it's going to be different school to school in terms of when dates for exact things here fall. But this is kind of the rough rhythm of the school year. That means that the point we're in right now, which is during the AP exam window here in May, this is across both our test prep and essay and application coaching sides of our business, our period of lowest homework compliance from the students working with us. And that's because they are very, very busy. And so this is the important thing to know about the academic calendar, that this end of year time period, April, May, and June, if you're still in school in June, that's going to be a really busy time for you all 4 years, but especially junior year, and often even especially senior year if you're taking a really heavy AP course load. And you know that you can get credit for those courses at the college you're going to be enrolling, enrolling in. So all of those things are what you want to keep in mind in terms of the academic calendar that's going to repeat every year. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Alyssa to talk about building the college list over the years of high school.
Yes, so the college list is the other component that we've carved out from this sort of chronological approach that we're going to be taking for the rest of the presentation, because for the first half of high school, per se, the advice is primarily going to be the same, but then as we move into junior and senior year, it can pick up and become, a little bit more of a shifting target as students move into, starting to pin down and eventually finalizing their college list. I also want to pause and make a brief housekeeping note. We will hang around after our presentation to take any questions that you have, so please feel free to leave them for us in the Q&A or the chat function, and we will get back to all of those questions at the end of the presentation. So let's start off when we talk about the college list by taking some pressure off. For many students, you don't have to be thinking about a college list yet, especially for students who are in ninth grade or 10th grade. All you need to be doing at this point is starting to think about what might I like in a school? Do I want a big school, a small school? Do I want to be in a city, in the suburbs? Do I want to have a college town? How far away from home do I want to be? How close to home do I want to be? And one of the best ways to do that is to visit some schools in and around your area. When we work with students on college advising, we often can make recommendations going, oh, you're going to Boston. Here's 5 schools for you to visit. You're in the Philadelphia area. Here's 5 schools. You're going down south. Here are some schools that you can take a look at to start to determine what do I like in a school. If you visit, say, you know, Drexel University in Pennsylvania and you go, hey, I kind of like this. I'm in the city, that's cool, but there's also a dedicated campus. That's something that can help you when you go to look at, say, Northeastern. It's going to be a school that feels very similar to Drexel in that way. And they also both have great co-op programs. So there you go. Um, these types of visits can be low stakes. You don't have to travel far, but it helps you to start to pin down what matters to me in a college. And that continues as we move into 11th grade and we begin to define that ideal college profile. And I do want to talk about visits here and go, you do not need to visit every school on your list. Um, Visiting can be helpful to determine if you want to apply, but there are wonderful resources, virtual visits, flip books, all of the different resources available to you to decide if you want to apply to a school. There are also some select schools, and we advise students on this all the time. I think most of us have the names of the most notorious offenders in this category on their list. American, Tulane, Lehigh, Fairfield, Ithaca, Dickinson. There are schools that care a lot about demonstrated interest and will factor that into an application decision. So visiting those schools can be important, but you don't need to visit every single school on your list. It can become difficult, if not downright impossible, depending on where your schools are located. Winter and spring breaks can be great times to visit. Um, High school and college spring breaks often don't line up, so you can visit during your spring break and still see students on campus, get a sense of what it would truly be like to be a student on this campus, as opposed to summer, where it's still worthwhile, but you're not going to necessarily get the same sense. If you were to visit my alma mater, for instance, during the summer, you would just be surrounded by tiny 8-year-old ballerinas because the school rented out space to one of the youth ballets in the area. And it was a very different feeling than when it was bustling with 18 to 22-year-olds trying to run to and from classes. So, as we move into the latter half of junior year, we have our rising seniors. You still don't need a definite list at this point, but starting to pin down a partial list, knowing 4 or 5 schools that you are sure of, puts you in a great position to start compiling your applications over the summer between junior and senior year. For rising seniors, as we get to August, this would be the point where you need to decide if you have an early decision school. That November 1st deadline will be coming up, as well as any early action schools. Another early application process, though not binding, with deadlines around October to November. Making these decisions by August, just before your senior year, can set you up to have enough time to finish preparing and submitting those applications in a timely manner. March through May of senior year is also going to be a great time to visit. Colleges roll out the red carpets at Admitted Students Day, and it can be a really great way to help a student decide between two options is to be back on those campuses as an admitted student, where the school now has to court you rather than the other way around. So, like I said, this we carved out because it's not part of that chronological component, but we're going to move into that, and I'll hand it over to Kevin to start taking us through freshman year.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you get to freshman year, the most important thing is just to get focus on getting comfortable with high school. It is a completely new situation for students socially, academically, and that's okay for them to just get their feet wet and get settled. With that said, right, at once your student arrives in high school, the focus should be on exploration, right? Whether that's exploring specialized classes that may interest them, getting a sense of which academic fields they align with more closely, trying new academic or extracurricular opportunities, new clubs, new sports. It's a great time to just explore. Now, so that's priority A. If you don't know what you're going to major in college at this point in time, it's totally fine. You're exploring. With that said, the one thing you may want to consider is your math track. The reason we're bringing this up is for students who ultimately go to college in certain disciplines, that your math track does matter. So if you're a college, if you're someone who's going to major in an engineering field, a business field, a math related field, you should have calculus by the time you graduate in high school. And depending on what math track you are currently on, that may not be the case. So, and also, I guess I should probably explain what I mean math track. I mean the sequence of math courses you will take as a student. So that would typically be like algebra 1, geometry, algebra 2, pre-calc, calc is kind of an example of a math track. So now, what if you are a student, or if you have a student in your family who is considering one of those disciplines? They don't know what they want to study in college yet, but they like dealing with technology, perhaps coding, something like that, right? And they may be in that field. If they are behind that math track I described, where they're taking calc, AP Calc their senior year, you have options to catch up, so to speak. So, because if in the example I gave, if you are in algebra 1 in ninth grade, by the time you get to your senior year, you have only gotten to pre-calc, right? Which is not quite enough to make yourself a competitive applicant in those fields for college. So you can catch up by taking you have multiple options depending on which school or school district you're in. Summer courses are a great opportunity to catch up. So as an example, the example student I gave, if you're taking algebra 1 freshman year, you could, for example, the summer before freshman and sophomore year, take geometry, right? So that is something that is worth investigating. Something I do want to mention as well is that it is the reason we bring this up now as a freshman year consideration is it's easier to take a summer school course in an earlier part of that math sequence than later. It's a little bit harder to kind of hit the acceleration on learning a super complex subject, right? Or a more complex subject, I should say. With that said as well, we do offer tutoring here at IB Experience, and we do offer tutoring support for those summer math courses. So, if you have a student who, now that you're thinking about it, may need to pursue this option, perhaps, accelerate their math track, we do have tutors who can support students as they take those online summer classes or in-person summer classes, depending on what your school or school district does.
And I'll mention one other quick point on the note of the math subject is sometimes it's about skipping an entire course in the sequence. Like you might need to take Algebra 2 over the summer to get on track to take calculus your senior year. Sometimes it's about moving up a level and the exactly where in the curriculum the standard level Algebra 1 class stops is not the same as the advanced Algebra 1 class. So sometimes you may just need to cover a few concepts over the summer that if you had been in honors the year before, you would have covered, and now you're switching into honors in a subsequent year. So it can really vary whether we're talking about covering a full, course of math over the summer, which is really going to be like a lot of daily work for a student, versus learning a few topics, which can either be daily work over a shorter time or can be kind of spread out a little bit over the whole summer.
It's a very good point, Jim. Yeah, so moving on, right? So that is what's happening in a freshman year. Moving to sophomore year, you want to continue exploring. It's okay that if you haven't figured out where your areas of interest in are at exactly yet, whether it's extracurricularly or academically. However, at this point, because you were exploring during that freshman year, you're beginning to develop some preferences, right? Maybe you have a sense of, I enjoy the environment around the field hockey team more than the theater productions or vice versa, right? And you can begin embracing depth over breadth. So, because that is ultimately something that will make your extracurriculars shine a little bit brighter when we get later in the process. So, if if you have preferences, lean into them. It's okay to pare back. You don't necessarily have to be engaged in 50 different activities as a high schooler to get into college. So, it's if there's something you don't enjoy, this may be a time to consider cutting down on it. Moving to kind of the more formal aspects of things, depending on your school district, a lot of school districts do offer a PSAT that they just automatically give to students. So that is something that you may see during your sophomore year. Sort of common dates we listed here, October or April. Something that we do recommend to students is to look into a pre-ACT if it's offered, or a diagnostic ACT. That is something that we offer to students or prospective students who want to work with us, because sophomore year is a great time to begin thinking about your testing plan. And the reason we mentioned this is that at this point in time is that you will have ultimately, as part of the college admissions process, you should think about taking the SAT or ACT. While there are a good number of schools that are test optional, the pendulum is swinging towards test required. So you should assume for now that's ultimately going to be a part of your experience. And so ultimately you want to figure out, which test am I stronger in? The fact that your school is offering you maybe a PSAT is a great time to get a sense of, hey, am I good at taking the SAT? Right? Or you could take a pre-ACT in the same way. If you are trying to figure this out, or maybe your school doesn't offer these things and you're wanting to figure out, am I stronger in the ACT or SAT? Reach out to us. We are happy to offer consultations and to work students through a diagnostic test and to help them see, is an ACT or an SAT a better fit for me as I begin to create a plan for standardized test.
And I'll add to that in this world where test optional is still, a broadly available option, a lot of families might at the end of sophomore year want to consider diagnostic testing for what I call a feasibility check. In other words, where is my student right now on the SAT and ACT? And then have a conversation with me based on those results, based on your student's, profile, what kind of improvement would be realistic and what amount of test prep would it take to get there. So looking at that kind of thing can just help you determine, is it worth any kind of investment of time and money into preparing for these tests based on what a likely outcome might be from the standpoint of where we are now. And that's a free meeting that I'll do with anyone who does diagnostic testing with us, which is also free.
It's a great resource. I highly suggest we have a link in the chat in case you want to take Jim up on that offer. So one of the reasons that I mentioned in the previous slide, start thinking about your testing plan, is one of the best times to begin actual prep for standardized testing is in that summer before junior year. Now, there is a caveat there, and we mentioned in that first bullet point is that, hey, has your student completed Algebra 2 or geometry? Because content-wise, they will need content for these standardized exams, right? But if they've done that, if they've completed those courses, this is a great time to engage in test prep and to begin thinking about that. Now, the one thing I will mention, because we talked about math sequences and math tracks, right? Some school districts, some schools, they have, I guess, what you would call an integrated math curriculum. So they'll label the courses like Math 1, Math 2, Math 3, etc. And so those courses will kind of weave in and out of different subjects in a way that makes sense for that school and the way they want to teach that material. So if you're unsure whether you kind of reached this threshold of Algebra 2 and geometry because you're in an integrated math curriculum and you're like, well, I've done Math 2, is this enough, right? That's okay. just get in touch with us, email us the name of the high school, the math courses. We can review the curriculum online and see like what that course was teaching you, and to see where you're at, and to help you have an understanding of where you're at and how to best move forward with a testing plan of some sort. The other thing outside of testing plans and test prep is you want to use the summers at this point. We don't want you just sitting at home and doom scrolling all day on TikTok, right? Try to engage in some sort of meaningful extracurricular activity. Now, with that said, some parents will come to us and get really concerned that, hey, if I'm not doing this highly specialized, highly impressive thing, am I behind? No, that's not the case. I wouldn't stress yourself with that. There's not a right or wrong activity for you to do. Just do something that's important and interesting and meaningful to you. So you can think about whether that's something that is related to an extracurricular, because maybe if you are that theater kid, if there is an example to maybe do community theater, or engage in like some volunteer work where you're teaching kids how to engage with the theater, that'd be kind of cool, right? You could also think about this academically, because maybe if you enjoy engineering and you were exploring it, but you're beginning to kind of solidify around that potential academic area, well, maybe you do something in robotics, right? That's more focused in that area. Don't freak yourself out about a right or wrong activity, but just try to engage in something in a meaningful way. Now, once you've gotten through the summer, you've done your activity, you have your testing plan, maybe you've done test prep, right? You're in junior year. And something that some of my co-presenters mentioned earlier in the webinar is, as you begin to enter those upperclassmen years, this is where things get a little more serious, where there's a little bit of a moving target depending on where you're at. But to give kind of an overview that hopefully will be useful for all students, right? This is the time, first off, extracurricularly, this is the time to invest in depth, right? So if you shouldn't be necessarily abandoning activities and pursuing a whole bunch of new activities. If you have been playing a sport, hey, maybe this is a good time to try out for varsity, right? Or to see, if you can be maybe a captain or co-captain of that sport. If you're engaged in a club, maybe you run for an officer position, right? Or you try to find a meaningful way you can contribute more to that club. So try to invest in depth in that area. There isn't necessarily a right or wrong way to invest in depth, but just engage in the things that you're passionate about. As far as testing, the October PSAT is very important. It counts for the National Merit Scholarship. For those who are not familiar, that is a scholarship program that is sort of accepted across a lot of universities, and the amount that universities will provide to National Merit Scholars will vary a little bit. But if you score really, really well on the PSAT, you will be considered for the scholarship program. And what's cool about this scholarship program, National Merit Scholarship Program, is that even if you are, say, a semifinalist, some universities will even give you some money for that. So that is a cool opportunity. And so don't stress yourself out about that PSAT. It is not a decision maker as far as college admissions, but don't necessarily mail it in either. Don't go to sleep at 2 a.m. before you take that PSAT. It does count for something. Now, with that said, if you haven't yet, because we did mention ideally, maybe you're doing test prep over the summer, but maybe you didn't get through those math courses yet, right? Or just, because life happens, you haven't been able to engage in test prep yet. Use that PSAT as a point to determine whether the SAT, whether you're good at it, whether it's a good fit, but also take a diagnostic ACT. Even if you are good at the SAT or you feel good about it, you may be better at the ACT. And that's important information to know, because universities ultimately in the college admissions process value the ACT and the SAT the same. So you should ultimately go with the test that you will perform better in. So take that diagnostic ACT, or if you took a pre-ACT and maybe you've taken a diagnostic ACT already, at least take some sort of PSAT, SAT, get a sense of how you are in the other exam. That's the point, right? You can use that information to begin forming a test prep plan to figure out which, if it is worthwhile to Jim's point earlier, to invest in test prep, and which exam is worth investing your time and potentially money in. on our end, working with students, November, so once you've settled a little bit and you got your feet wet and you're settled into junior year, that's a good time to book a consultation with us here on the essay and application coaching team, because, it's an opportunity to figure out, hey, how counselors like ourselves work with students, to begin figuring out like what you don't know as part of this process, and begin creating a plan for yourself as far as, hey, how am I going to put that list together, to Alyssa's point at the beginning of the webinar? How am I going to explore what my interests are? How am I going to think about, do I need to know my major? How am I going to think about this whole process, right? And so those consultations are a great opportunity to ask an expert like me, Alyssa, or Jordan about that type of information. And to also begin talking about, hey, what does your ultimate steps between now and hitting submit in the lesser rate applications look like? So take advantage of that opportunity. We will provide in the course of this webinar links and sort of methods to contact us. So get in touch. Now, with that said, that aside, once let's say you're into the winter break of junior year, and ideally a little bit before winter break, you should start thinking about, sometime in the winter, you should start thinking about summer activities, because this is your last opportunity to do something, to have a block of time where you can do something cool or meaningful related to an academic or or extracurricular area you're very passionate about, right? So once again, there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer, but if you are applying into a field that's very competitive, like let's say pre-med, engineering, business, you may want to think about perhaps doing something related to that. It can be a pre-college program. It doesn't have to be. I think parents are very obsessed about those programs, and there are some good ones out there, but they're not the only way to engage in that way. You just want to think about it and make a plan. So you can think about, hey, do I want to apply for internships, with maybe some local financial firms or the local chamber of commerce, right? Or do I want to engage in coding my own app and learning some new skills and tech, right? There's not a wrong answer, but think about what you're passionate about extracurricularly and academically, and really lean in and make that plan during winter break, because some programs or some opportunities, whether it's an internship or summer program at a university or research program, have deadlines during the winter time period, when early spring time period. That's why we're mentioning you should start making that plan, because if there's a cool internship at a local hospital or with the NIH or wherever else, you don't want to miss that application deadline if there is one. Now, with that said, in junior year, as you mentioned, you're going to do a consultation with us, right? And get a sense of what you'll have to do, in part because we're going to support you. We as counselors support students with their application materials. And so in the calendar during February, the Common App releases essay prompts. Now, with that said, don't freak out about that. There usually aren't many changes, if any at all. So you don't need to stress about that, but that's just something that we're making you aware of. So, at least check in, maybe see if there's any changes, right? And if you're working with us, we'll let you know. Now, and also by the end of the year, with your applications now in mind, because towards that springtime junior year, you're beginning to think about and even perhaps start on some of your application materials, because the nice thing about those essay prompts coming out is now what they are. You can maybe begin brainstorming and even working on that application item, because the core components of who makes you, whether it's the traditions your family has, the way you see the world, they're probably not going to change radically in the few months over the summer, right? And you can begin thinking about those things during the spring of your junior year, and perhaps brainstorming, perhaps even in some cases, summer students draft during that time. The other application item you want to consider as well during your junior year is your letters of recommendation. That is something that we suggest students ask for before the end of the school year. And as far as who those recommenders should be, there isn't, we commonly suggest core subject area teachers, ideally from your junior year. Now, there are certain caveats and exceptions and all that, because the most important thing, obviously, is that recommender has positive things to say about you, that they can actually write you a positive letter of recommendation and speak to the academic soft skills that you have, and your intellectual curiosity and your analytical ability and all of that. But ultimately, colleges, I as a former admissions officer can speak to this. We want to know who you're going to be on our campus, right? And a math teacher or an English teacher from your junior year is often someone who's better at speaking to that than a teacher from freshman. So that's why we do suggest, if it's possible, try to get a core subject teacher from junior year. But if you had a teacher for 2 years and they're maybe in psychology, or maybe there's a very meaningful activity you engage in the community for a decade, and there's someone there who can speak very strongly to it, there's nothing wrong with that letter either. We don't necessarily want to put you in a box. Yeah, so I guess that is kind of where things will be at through your junior year. Now, summer before senior year is when things really start to ramp up.
Exactly. This is a really important time of year in order to get your ducks in a row so that your senior year is as easy as possible. Senior year courses and senior year classes and grades do still matter on your application, especially for applying regular decision or early action and get deferred or something like that. So make sure that you can clear the runway to be as successful and focused on your academics as possible. Again, if you haven't finished your test prep, this is the time to do it, whether it's taking a couple SATs or ACTs, having conversation, thinking about what those next steps are. This is the time to do that because, again, you don't want that hanging over your head in senior year. As Kevin said, we start with students as early as November of their junior years on their essays and applications. Because the Common App prompts typically don't change, we can start working towards that Common Application essay, also known as a personal statement. And ideally, we would finish as much of this process, if not everything, before your student goes back to class in senior year, goes back to school. So having everything done, either at the beginning of the year or near the beginning of the year, will be such a great relief to have everything done, be able to be submitted on time. And again, working with us, make sure that you will have that resource, that responsibility, and also that pacing to keep on pace for that as well. This is also a great time to see college campuses. You might run into 8-year-old ballerinas, but just knowing where you want to go, thinking about the types of colleges that you want to go to, and starting to hone down your list a little bit. We always say that you never need to have a final college list, but just have at least sure bets, the ones that you know that you're going to apply to, that fit within the criteria that you've determined that makes sense for your college list. Again, demonstrated interest. Are you thinking about a school? Are you thinking about Dickinson? Are you thinking about American, Ithaca, places like that, that care about whether you visit and whether you engage? If you are, then you absolutely should make an effort to go visit if you can. If not, again, Alyssa has mentioned that there are ways to engage virtually that also does count for demonstrated interest, because again, those colleges do care about that on their application process. And we've kept saying engage in meaningful activities, but this is really important to do that, especially when you're thinking about what you want to spend your time on during the summer. Don't do something just because it sounds cool, or rather it sounds like it would be great on your application. Don't do it for college, do it for yourself. And find ways to engage that are meaningful to you. And you get to determine what engaging and meaningful means. We'll help you with that if you work with us on the application side to give yourself full credit for the things that you're doing. But again, make sure that you're spending your time wisely over the summer, not only preparing for college, but also, again, engaging something that's meaningful to you. On August 1st, the Common Application opens. It is a crazy day. The Common App always crashes. We do not recommend going into the Common Application because, again, it will always crash. August 2nd, August 3rd is a great time to set up your account if you haven't already. But that is the main thing that you'll be doing throughout the summer of your senior year. Then when senior year comes around, really we're getting to hitting the pedal to the metal rather. Continue to invest in extracurricular depth. Again, we really want to make sure the students are engaged in things that are meaningful to them, whatever that means to you, whether it be about running for a position, engaging more meaningfully in an organization or community that makes sense to you, whatever that looks like. Make sure that you're doing something that you care about, because again, you're going to be happier, you're going to enjoy it. And yes, it will happen to look good on your applications as well, but you're really getting that personal meaning out of that activity as well. In the early fall, it's always nice to follow up with the teachers that you asked before you left for school in junior year about those recommendation letters. Hopefully you have a more concrete idea as to what you're going to apply for and where you're going to apply as well. And sharing those pieces of information can be helpful. Saying, hey, I'm going to apply an early decision for a November 1st deadline. Do you think it would be okay if you can send in your letter before then or by then as well? So communicating with your recommenders, making sure that you're all on the same page and thanking them profusely, because often this is something that they're doing on top of their job of teaching you and grading you as well. So make sure that you're being very nice and very gracious and over communicative as well. Once we're starting to get into October, this is where some of the deadlines start approaching and applications also open for specific universities. The University of California system has a separate application from the Common Application, which is where a majority of colleges are. The UC system is different, and they have their separate application that opens on October 1st. The FAFSA, or the free application for federal student aid, also opens on October 1st. So you can go in and start to apply to those institutions and for that financial aid document at that time as well. Also worth noting that October and September are the last two test dates that you can take to then get a score back in time to then apply for early action and early decision deadlines as well. These are really important test dates. These are things that you want to be able to actually prepare for, see what your score is, and then make a decision as to whether you're going to send that score to the schools that you're applying to. And then October 15th is the first deadline for early decision and early action, mostly actually early action schools. Typically, these are larger public institutions in the South. Think the University of Texas at Austin, think University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Those institutions will have October 15th deadlines. Then a huge wave of deadlines come on November 1st. So right around that late October, early November time is a really crucial time to be submitting your applications. If you are working with us, you will be done with all essays and applications 2 weeks before a school's deadline at the very latest, because we don't want anybody scrambling. And we not so jokingly say that we don't want you to be crying on Halloween. That will not happen. You will be done with these essays beforehand. You'll be prepared so that you can submit your applications, get your portal login, make sure that everything's made it there on time. And if it hasn't, you can then call and troubleshoot before that deadline rolls around. Once we get into the later half of senior year, we start then talking about the December SAT and ACT, and that's, again, the last test date that's allowed for regular decision deadlines, which then typically come in January. However, before then, December 15th is most early decision notifications. So you apply November 1st, admission officers work incredibly diligently up until that early mid-December deadline, and then they release the decisions at that point. If you get an early decision, that is the binding agreement, meaning that you are committing to attending that university should you be admitted when you apply. So if you get in, congrats, you're done. No more, you can stop listening to the presentation. At that point, though, you do have a couple of next steps that your university will follow up with you on. But again, it's a really exciting time to celebrate with your family and all the people who supported you. Late December, early January, that's when a lot of regular decision deadlines are. And that's when students have to apply by that last date for the regular timeline. Then when we have that January time comes around, lots of things happen there too, including sending an updated transcript to colleges. As I said before, those senior year grades are really, really important, especially if you are deferred from the early decision or early action deadline you apply to, which only means that your application is going to be moved to the regular decision pool, and they're reviewing a little bit more information from you, most notably your senior year grades. I did not say this earlier, but I'm also a former admission officer, and those senior grades were incredibly important to make sure that you're doing well, keeping up with the material, things like that. So absolutely do not take your foot off the gas your senior year. Do not have your students do that so that they can send that updated transcript and show the strongest grades that they can. In January or February, usually mid-January or so, a lot of early action deadlines, or rather early action decisions come back, meaning that you're going to hear from those schools that are not binding, meaning that you don't have to go if you apply. However, if you do get into those schools, you then have some options in front of you, but again, you don't have to make a decision until May 1st. Then once we get to March or April, regular decision deadlines roll around and those notifications are sent out as well. And then April is really fun, as Alyssa said earlier. This is Accepted Students Day, where you're wined and dined, not actually you're underage, but still you are able to have really great times on campus, meeting people who were admitted, meeting people who are advocates of the university, meeting professors, things like that, and be really, really engaged with the university that you've been admitted to. And then the national reply deadline is May 1st, where you do have to make a decision and a deposit at the school that you are intending to apply to next year or attend next year. Then in late May or June, you graduate and then you're done. Congratulations. We do have a couple of pieces about SATs and ACTs, especially when we get into senior year and some of those important deadlines.
Yeah, so Jordan mentioned some of these throughout his talking in senior year about what test scores are used for which college deadlines. But I wanted to just provide a visual and just remind you all of that because I know we got a lot of rising senior parents in our attendee list tonight, and some of you will be testing again. So highlighted in yellow here or orange or whatever this color is. I'm not an expert, I can say. These are the dates that are going to be accepted for early action and early decision deadlines at just about every college. So, if you take the ACT by September or the SAT by the October test date, just about any school in the country that has one of those October 15th through November 15th early deadlines are going to accept those scores. There are some schools that will accept the October ACT for November 1st and November 15th deadlines. The one that comes to mind that I know of is Vanderbilt. They take October ACT scores, but not all of them do. ACT scores are sometimes released much later. Don't want to get into that now, but it just makes it harder for colleges to use them in a time crunch. The December test dates will be accepted for any regular deadlines, though. So if you're a student who knows, hey, I'm going to have a big advantage if I can get my score a little higher based on where your scores are, where your college list is, then you do have through December for regular deadlines. So just wanted to provide a visual of this. It's all things that Jordan already touched on, but just so you can look at it, see it. It's easier for my brain to wrap around it that way. And with that, I'll pass it back to Jordan to talk about what's going on in admissions offices during all this time.
Yeah, so parallel to your high school career and your high school timeline, admission offices are also on their own timelines. Now, this is going to vary across multiple institutions, right? No two institutions do the same thing for undergraduate admission, but generally speaking, this is what will happen, particularly starting in August. That's the beginning of the quote cycle, as we talk about. Admission officers are preparing for travel over the fall. In September and October. They will then go out on the road, as it's called, go to their assigned territories or the geographic locations that they cover. It might be a city, it might be a state, it might be multiple states. When I was in admissions, I covered at one point 11 states across 4 time zones. That was really fun. But you got to conduct school visits and you go to the high schools, you talk about your institution, you answer questions. Maybe you do interviews, maybe you do a college fair, things like that. But that's when the admission officers really are recruiters, because ultimately that's what they are. They're trying to get the biggest pool of applicants possible for their institution. So they really want to answer your questions. They want you to ask them questions. So don't be intimidated when they do come to your school. Again, mid-October to mid-November are the typical early application deadlines, which means that at that point, you typically start reading applications. And when the application review time comes around, we come back from the road, we go into training, have conversations about thinking about those application reviews. And again, we're reading applications really November through March in earnest. Then again, mid-March through early April, we have those regular decision releases as we talk about the early application releases earlier and again in January or December and January. But the regular decision ones come in mid-March to early April. And then we're back out on the road in April, where you're either doing regional admitted student events where we're going to you, celebrating you in your area. It'll probably be in larger cities in your area, Philadelphia, Boston, New York, Miami, wherever it might be. And then we're also hosting on-campus activities as well. So one time you'll be out on the road, and the next day you have to fly back home because the day after that, you then have an admitted student day on campus. So it's a lot of really fun times to meet students who you're admitted and having conversations with. Then again, the all-important May 1st enrollment decision deadline is due. That's where we're seeing who admitted or who rather accepted our invitation to attend our institutions. And then quite literally, we do nothing between May and August. It's about rest and recuperation and planning for the next cycle. Maybe your territory changes, maybe you go on vacation, maybe you think more specifically about how you can plan your fall so that you don't have to drive all over creation on a specific day or whatever it might be. But again, this is an important thing to think about, that the admission office is also having a cyclical nature throughout their timelines as well. And just so you know, when you're going out on the road and when you're seeing those admission officers at your school, this is what they're going through and what's ahead of them as well.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And thank you to everyone who came out tonight or stayed in tonight watching our webinar. We do appreciate it. If you enjoyed it, we'll be well, whether you enjoyed it or not, we'll be sending you the link to the YouTube recording. And if you enjoyed it, then at that point, you can send it along to any friends or, family members who you think might benefit from seeing this as well. Like all of our webinars, this will be on YouTube. At this point, we're going to move to Q&A, so please keep posting your questions and we will answer them to the best of our ability. The first one that came in said, my son is a freshman now and considering playing college baseball, unsure if D3 or higher level. When would coaches begin speaking with him? So this one I can answer broadly and not specifically. And what I mean by that is that uh, every NCAA sport has a date at which college coaches are allowed to contact recruits. And that date is different for every sport. And I do not remember what it is for baseball in particular, but I'm sure Google will be able to help you with that. So just search like what date NCAA baseball coaches are allowed to contact recruits. And that would be when coaches are allowed to get in touch. Typically, what it means when you're going for athletic recruiting status is that you want to take the SAT or ACT officially a little earlier in the process, especially if you're a student who's aiming to play at an academically competitive school, and especially if that school is test required now. That means that you're likely going to have to hit a certain test score for admissions. Depending on the level of recruit you are, it's going to vary kind of what that score needs to be. College coaches are typically given an average score that their team needs to maintain. So coaches want to spend the low scores on the athletes that they want the most. And then often in a test optional context, coaches are given a percentage of score submission that they need to maintain as well. So they may be able to bring on a certain number of athletes with no test scores, but they need a certain percentage of their athletes to submit test scores. So by having a test score, you give coaches more valuable information that they can use to evaluate you, and having a higher test score does make you more recruitable in the end. Next question. Single choice early action versus early decision. Which one has a better chance for admission? For example, Harvard's single choice early action versus Dartmouth early decision.
I can speak to this one, and I'm going to start off essentially by defining just the difference between early decision and single choice or restrictive early action. So early decision is perhaps the more straightforward. A student selects one school, applies to that school, and makes a binding commitment that if they are accepted to that school, they will attend. However, there are a small number of schools, often highly selective schools. Harvard is a great example. Stanford is like this. Georgetown is like this. Notre Dame is like this, where instead of early decision, they offer something called single choice or restrictive early action. This, in many ways, is like diet early decision. You have you apply early and you hear back early. However, it is not binding. If accepted to Georgetown through the restrictive early action program, you are not obligated to attend Georgetown. However, these institutions impose some additional restrictions on early action application. Typically, that you cannot apply early decision to any other school if you are applying SCEA or REA to these schools. But other restrictions might be that you can't apply early action either to any private schools. This is one of the restrictions that Stanford has. So these policies can be a little bit more nebulous. We are always here to help students navigate them. Now, speaking to this particular instance, whether as restrictive early action versus early decision is going to give you a better chance of admissions, in some ways, the actual answer there is to look at the college itself and how they privilege early decision or their early decision equivalent, rather than looking at restrictive early action across the board versus early decision. Both of these categories are going to give you an advantage over a regular decision applicant, but the degree to which a school attempts to fill its freshman class through this is going to vary from school to school to school.
Okay, awesome. Next question. If a student applies early decision to a college and if they are not accepted, can they still apply regularly? And I believe the question is, can they still apply regularly to the school at which they were denied early decision?
Okay, so I'll take this question and I'll answer in a couple ways, both to the way Jim kind of phrased it, but also to the other way in case anybody's curious. So if you are rejected early decision, that typically means you are just rejected. You are not going to reapply. What there is kind of an in-between option, which is some becoming increasingly common. You might have been deferred. A deferral is not the same thing as a rejection. If you're deferred, it means your application will be considered for regular decision, right? It's just they were not comfortable at this point in time accepting you as part of that early decision process. So that's probably I think what the person is getting at here. I do want to also point out if you're speaking about regular decision. So if you are rejected to ED to a college, you can apply regular decision to other institutions. You have plenty of flexibility there. If you are rejected to a school or a decision, you can also apply early decision to another institution. Now, for those who are not aware, early decision is, as we spoke about in the roadmap, typically has an earlier deadline. You're making a contractual commitment to attend a school if you are accepted and to withdraw your other applications. Some universities have what's called early decision 2, meaning that the deadlines for those, it's the second round of early decision. The deadlines for those are typically around the regular decision deadlines of like around January 1st, let's say. And so you can apply early decision 2 to a separate institution if you are rejected early decision 1. So I wanted to, because I wasn't quite sure about the interpretation of the questions, I wanted to answer all of them if possible.
I'll also jump in and go, you can also apply early decision 2 to another institution if you are deferred from your early decision
Right.
1 institution. If you are deferred from early decision 1, you are then released from that binding commitment. Even if you, for instance, were to be accepted later on in the regular decision round, you are no longer bound by the agreement that you made, and you could choose to attend a different institution.
One final little nuance on this point is that you can apply to other schools' regular decision and early action even before you get an answer back from that early decision school. And in
And you
fact,
should.
that's what we recommend. Get all of your applications out before you hear back from anyone. Because when you think about what college applications ask you to do in these essays, which is to bare your soul on a piece of paper, or rather a digital piece of paper, uh, you're not going to want to do that right after, your dream school just told you no. So you really don't want to wait until after an early decision notification to put your other applications in. You are just not going to be in a headspace to do your best work. So our advice is figure out everywhere you want to apply to all of them. If you get into that early decision school, great. You just contact those other colleges and say, hey, I'm withdrawing my application. I was accepted early decision somewhere else. That way you don't take a spot from a student who could really use it. And then you just go on with your life and you're done with everything early in the process, as we always advocate. It looks like that was our last question. So thanks everybody who joined us tonight. We really appreciate it. Hope you found this helpful. If you're interested in working with us on test prep, on college advising, on your essays and applications, we'll send every attendee and the registrants who couldn't make it tonight links to follow up on all of that. We hope you have a great night and best of luck with your end of year exams and busyness. Bye bye.